we're going to talk about a bank. It is the mother of all central banks. It's the bank where Ben Bernanke reports to, along with other central bankers around the world. Few people know about this bank. It is known as BIS, the Bank for International Settlements. My guest today has written a fantastic book on this subject. The book is Tower of Babel, the shadowy history of the secret bank that runs the world. The author is Mr. Adam Labor. He's a foreign correspondent who has worked in over 30 nations. He currently writes for The Economist and The Times of London. He's written 10 books, which have been published in 12 languages. Those books include Hitler's Secret Bankers, How Switzerland Profited from Nazi Genocide, Complicity with Evil, The United Nations in the Age of Modern Genocide, The Believers, How America Fell for Bernard Madoff's $65 billion investment scam. His newest book is, and with titles like this, I have to ask myself why he hasn't been on True News much earlier. His newest book is, as I said, The Tower of Babel, the shadowy history of the secret bank that runs the world. His website is adamlabor.com. Labor is Lebor, adamlabor.com. Adam, welcome to True News.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, sir. Glad to have you on the program. I think you can tell by the introduction, I don't like Nazis.
No. Although I've got to say, I think you're overstating it slightly. I mean, the Bank for International Settlements is not a Nazi bank. I mean, during the 1930s and the 1940s, it did certainly help the Third Reich. But I mean, you can't say that it is one nowadays. I mean, nowadays it's the main meeting point for the central bankers of the world to discuss monetary policy.
But it was started in the 30s to assist the Nazis. Is that correct?
It was started in the 30s as a place to initially handle German reparations payments for the First World War. And it was set up under something called the Young Plan, which was set up by an American diplomat called Owen Young. And the Young Plan was the aim to manage the payments Germany had to pay for starting the First World War. But the real reason it was started was to have a place that was legally inviolable for central bankers to meet.
Now, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, the BIS is it's extraterritorial. It's like the United Nations or a diplomatic embassy. Its assets can never be seized, and it's a place that the Swiss authorities have to ask the permission of the management to enter it, because it's the only commercial bank in the world that's founded by an international treaty.
That's pretty amazing. A bank founded by an international treaty. Its assets cannot be seized by any nation on the planet, and the Swiss officials have to get permission before they can even enter the property.
Yes, that's right. That's what interested me about the bank, because it's this unique kind of hybrid of a commercial organization and a protected international organization. And it's a place where every 2 months, the central bankers of the world meet to discuss monetary policy. But we don't know what happens in these meetings. No minutes of these meetings are released, and we don't know who attends them.
What do you know about the treaty that established the bank?
Well, the treaty was founded in 1930, and the idea, the treaty was to set the bank up. And because it was an international bank, it's like the first global financial institution. It predates the International Monetary Fund, and it predates the World Bank. So because it's an international bank, it was founded by an international treaty, and the founding countries signed it. And the bank was set up, and it was obviously going to be set up in Switzerland, because that's a place where, you have the tradition of banking, the tradition of secrecy and neutrality.
Which countries were the signatories on this treaty, the main ones?
Britain, Germany, France, and Belgium, and Holland. And the United States was involved, but because obviously it was set up under the Young Plan. But the United States didn't take up its shares. The Federal Reserve didn't take up its shares in the bank, as did the central banks of Britain and France and everywhere else. They handed them over to a consortium of 3 private banks. And it wasn't until 1995 that the Federal Reserve finally took up its shares in the BIS.
That's interesting. Any speculation why that happened that way?
Yes, because initially, and for its first few years of existence, the BIS was very focused on Europe. During the 1930s, it started organizing the first bailouts. It helped bail out Hungary and Spain and Austria. And then during the Second World War, it was very closely allied to Nazi Germany. And after the Second World War, it became the place where a lot of the planning for the euro was done, the single European currency. So it was seen as a very, European institution, and the United States was not particularly interested in it. In the 60s and 70s, a man called Charles Coombs attended the meetings there. He worked for the New York Federal Reserve. But he wasn't a director of the bank. But then in the 90s, when finance became much more globalized, the U.S. administration thought we need to become part of this. And so they took up the shares that they'd been offered at the founding, and the Federal Reserve joined.
Let's talk about the 1930s and the BIS connection to the German Third Reich. Specifically, what was the role of the bank?
Well, the role of the bank, it's very interesting because by 1932 the bank was set up to pay German reparations. And by 1932, there were no more German reparations, especially after Hitler came to power. So we're not paying reparations. So the role of the bank became to organize the first bailouts, as I said, and it became a meeting place for meetings in great, confidentiality of the central bankers of the world. The governor of the Reichsbank in Germany, the Bank of England, and the Bank of France. And so it became very important to Germany. It lent a lot of money to Nazi Germany. It lent almost $100 million. It invested in Nazi Germany. And the interesting thing is that during the Second World War, Germany kept paying the interest on those investments. And the interest was paid out in dividends to the shareholders. And the shareholders included the Bank of England. So through the BIS, the Bank of England was getting money from Nazi Germany.
Thank you for proving my point in the introduction.
Yeah, but that was then, I
know. The Nazis aren't here anymore, Adam. I know what you're saying. They're not here anymore.
Yeah.
I believe they are here.
Then that's a different thing.
Yes, sir.
But at the time, the BIS was so important for Nazi Germany that Emil Pohl, who was the vice president of the Reichsbank and a director of the BIS, said that the BIS is the Reichsbank's only real foreign branch. It was doing foreign exchange deals for the Nazis. It was accepting looted Nazi gold. And it was very important. It was kind of like their window onto the world, in a way.
So in the 30s, we had the central banks of Great Britain and France, Belgium, Netherlands, and to some degree the United States. We're running the Bank of International Settlements and loaning $100 million to Hitler's Third Reich, and then receiving interest profits from the Third Reich. Adam, had the BIS not existed and there was no money lent to Germany during the 30s, would we have had the Third Reich and World War II?
Oh, I think yes. I mean, the BIS was not so crucial that without it the Germans couldn't have started the Second World War, but it was certainly very useful for the Germans. It served a purpose for them, and that's a matter of historical record. As I said, you've got the vice president of the Reichsbank saying that the BIS is their only foreign branch, but if the BIS didn't exist, then Nazi Germany would have still existed and would have probably still started the Second World War. It was part of a range of things that the Germans used.
Mm-hmm. But what was the thinking of the BIS directors in the 30s justifying their financial assistance and cooperation with the German Third Reich?
Well, it was the same as almost every other banker. I mean, they didn't make any moral judgment about what was happening there, and they just did business with it. But, that's something that's not peculiar to the BIS. In the 1930s, that was widespread. I mean, a lot of American corporations, it's been thoroughly documented, did good business with Nazi Germany, Ford and General Motors and Standard Oil and IBM. A lot of British banks and British bankers as well did business with Nazi Germany. So the BIS was something of its time. That was the general consensus at the time, was that, it was a good bet. Hitler was seen as a strong leader, and he was going to stand up against the threat of communism.
Yes, and George Bush's grandfather, Prescott Bush, had several businesses doing business with the Germans. In fact, at the start of World War II, Franklin Roosevelt's administration seized, I think it was 4 corporations owned or partly owned by the Bush family, and they were seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act.
Yes, I mean, I don't know the precise details of the Bush family's involvement, but I do know that it was widespread across Wall Street. Hitler was seen as a good business partner, and the Bush family were not alone in that. And the feeling was really that we've got to stop communism, and Hitler's going to bring stability. And it's unfortunate what he's doing to the Jews and perhaps invading other countries, but really that's not much to do with America.
What did the BIS do during World War II?
Well, during World War II, operations were scaled right down, but it did stay in existence. And what happened was that when the Germans invaded countries like France or Belgium or Holland, they would set up a puppet government, which was nominally, it was obviously under Nazi control, and the BIS gave the shares of the original countries, like the German central bank, the Belgian central bank, or the Polish National Bank, was handed over to these puppet governments. So the bank fell under quite strong German control, and it had 5 BIS directors after the Second World War were tried for war crimes.
Wait a minute, say this again.
After the Second World War, 5 BIS directors were tried for war crimes.
Any of them convicted?
The key man was Hjalmar Schacht, who was the president of the Reichsbank, who was regarded as the engine of the Nazi economy. And he was acquitted, which caused a big furore, even though it generally agreed that he was absolutely crucial to the German economic revival during the 1930s and getting the economy back on track to prepare for war. There were another man was called Hermann Schmitz, and he was the boss of IG Farben, the massive Nazi industrial and chemicals company, which made Zyklon B, the gas used to kill the Jews. And he was convicted and served, I think, a couple of years in prison, not very long at all. Walter Funk, the president of the Reichsbank, was also a director of the BIS. He was convicted, as was Emil Pool, his deputy. But none of them served very long. They served, sentences of 4 or 5 years, because the feeling was that they needed to be released because of the Cold War. We have to rebuild Germany, even though, a few months before we've been fighting it and bombing it. As soon as the fighting stopped, the sense was we have to rebuild it.
Adam, after World War II, then the BIS played a very important role in the planning stage for the new European Union and later for the euro currency. Take a few minutes and tell us about that involvement.
Yeah, no, that was very interesting. I mean, after the Second World War, there was pressure to shut the BIS down. Especially the pressure came from Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and Harry Dexter White. Henry Morgenthau said the BIS was a symbol of Nazi instrumentality. And Harry Dexter White, because during the war, the interesting thing about the BIS was that the president was American. So while the bank was doing business with the Germans, it has an American president. And Harry Dexter White, his name was Thomas McKittrick. Harry Dexter White said, while our boys are fighting the Germans, McKittrick's doing business with them. So that was, caused a lot of furore in Washington, and there was pressure to shut the bank down. But it survived because it had a lot of supporters on Wall Street and in London and in the State Department. And their argument was, look, Europe's wrecked, it's destroyed, we've got to build up the economy again. And I suppose This is an argument. And we have to, and the BIS is the natural place to do that because they set up the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, but they were very new institutions, and the BIS had the record, and the experience. So the BIS was brought in to start the process of preparing for the euro, the single European currency. Now that was introduced in 2002, but there was really decades of preparation before that. Because you can't just bring together, all these different currencies like the lira and the franc and the Deutschmark and say, oh, all of a sudden, all these countries are going to have one currency. You have to stabilize them so they don't jump around against each other and harmonize the exchange rates. And that was done through various things, such as the European Payments Union and the European Monetary Cooperation Fund, kind of, obscure things that most people have never heard of. But the BIS was for 40 or 50 years one of the key places where all the technical work was done for preparing the euro. And then in 1994, at the BIS, something called the European Monetary Institute was set up, and the European Monetary Institute became the European Central Bank, which is the bank for the 17 countries in the euro and controls their monetary policy.
Adam, last week the Bilderberg Group held its annual meeting. This time it was in the UK. Is there a connection between Bilderberg and BIS?
Not really, no. Not as far as I know. I mean, Bilderberg is more to do with politicians and statesmen and diplomats. I mean, the BIS is, is a quite precise thing. It's the bank for central banks. It offers banking services to central banks, does currency deals and gold swaps and short-term credit arrangements, and it's where the central bankers go. They go there to talk about monetary policy. It's not connected to the Bilderberg Group.
Okay, I've got about 3 minutes remaining. Let's talk about the BIS today. The central banks, the central bankers report to the BIS. Does this involve Russia and China, or are they out of the outside the loop?
No, Russia and China joined the bank in 1996, I believe, when it became more global, after the euro was set up. But the central bankers, they don't really report to the BIS, they don't report to the BIS. They don't go there and tell the bank what they're doing. They go there and tell each other what they're doing. It's the place where the big monetary policy discussions are. And Sir Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England, told me that during the crisis, the BIS was a very important point of contact where the bankers were discussing, how to respond to the crisis and what to do about the crisis. So
all of this monetary easing that we're watching around the world, the currency wars, the printing of money, essentially these decisions are being made at BIS meetings.
Well, this is what I've said to central bankers. They say we're not deciding at the BIS meetings. It's more subtle than that. What happens is that we go there and we hear the different perspectives. So obviously there's going to be a place where there's been a lot of discussions about monetary easing and printing money, and those discussions take place there. And then they go home and talk with their officials and their governments. But they are influenced by the discussions that take place at the BIS, and those discussions help set the agenda. But also lately I've heard that there's been, quite a lot of anger in the meetings from countries that are badly affected by quantitative easing because, when interest rates are so low, capital starts moving around the world looking for better interest rates. So lots of money is going into countries like Malaysia and Korea, and they don't want all this money coming in because it's distorting their economies. So, the meetings at the BIS are not the kind of smooth mutual agreement that they used to be before. Since the crisis, they've become much more acrimonious.
Okay, one final question. Several years ago, there was a lot of discussion about a global currency and a global central financial authority, and there was a discussion that the BIS could become the world central bank, the global central bank. Is there any talk? Have you heard anything like this, that's the next step for the BIS?
I don't think so, because banks and central banks guard their sovereignty quite strongly. I mean, I don't think that that's going to happen, that there's going to be a global central bank, where a group of bankers, of governors of such an imaginary bank are going to start telling all different countries what's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. But what we do see is that the BIS gave birth to the European Central Bank, which is also a bank protected by international treaty and which is not particularly accountable or transparent. So, there's a tradition there of the technocrats saying, look, we are the bankers, we know what's best for you, and we don't really need to explain to you what we're doing. So, but I mean, it's something that we have to keep a watch on. But I don't believe there's any plan for a major global central bank, because I don't see how it could work.
All right, my guest today, Mr. Adam Labor, calling in from Budapest, and the book, and this is his newest book, The Tower Basel: The Shadowy History of the Secret Bank That Runs the World. Adam, thank you so much. Appreciate you being on True News today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.